Good evening. My name is Steve Kaplan, and I'll be the incoming Research Council Chair. And thank you for participating in an exciting webinar we're going to have this evening on AUA advocacy, part of our informational series. And we're specifically going to talk today about urologists advocating to advance clinical research. And you're going to be hearing from folks who have been doing this a lot and almost every day of their existence over the last 2 or 3 years. Specifically, our panelists will be Toby Chai, who's now the Research Advocacy Chair, Dr. Carolyn Best, who is the AUA Research Director and my right arm, and really an amazing force in AUA research. Ray Wezek, the AUA Policy and Advocacy Director, and Kimberly Sirota, who's organized this all tonight, and she's our Patient and Research Advocacy Coordinator. Just in terms of format, before I turn this over to Toby, this will be about 45 to 50 minutes long, a 40-minute presentation and 5 to 10-minute Q&A session. This live webinar will be recorded and repurposed as a webcast and podcast. It will be available at no cost, and we will tell you later how to go to the webinar platform. We will ask questions at the end of the sessions. Please feel free to interact with us, and we will try to get as many answers as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Toby Chai, and Toby is the chair of the Research Advocacy Committee. He's been a partner of mine in this endeavor, and I look forward to hearing his comments. Toby?
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everyone. So you can see what the Research Advocacy Committee does in this lower part of the slide. We're open to all AUA members who are active in urologic research, and our mission is to champion for public, private, and philanthropic support of urologic research by energizing and synergizing with all stakeholders. Next slide, please. So, what is research advocacy? It's to raise awareness and educate about the importance of urologic research. Then we go for the quote, ask for support in policies that support urologic research. Next slide, please. So why does it matter? Research advocacy ensures that the urologic community's voices are being heard and allows for opportunity to discuss policies affecting urology research. Next slide, please. So who are some of the key players in research advocacy? We have research policymakers, such as the Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. We have federal research agencies, such as the NIH, Veteran Affairs, PCORI, which is the Center for Outcomes Research, the Department of Defense, although not directly impacting urology as much, but certainly National Science Foundation, or NSF, there. We also try to advocate for urologic research by talking to the part of the NIH that reviews the NIH grant applications, which is the CSR, or the Center for Scientific Review. And other stakeholders include patients themselves, patient advocacy groups, healthcare insurers, and certainly the pharmaceutical and device making or device maker industry. Next slide, please. So, how does research advocacy impact urology? Certainly, we know that advances in urology cannot occur without research. And without advances in urology, our patients are going to suffer. Urology research also increases the value of our specialty compared to all the other specialties out there. It puts urology in with other specialties that are advancing also. Next slide, please. So Carolyn, oh, I think Ray, I'm sorry, this is Ray's slide coming in.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Chai. I really appreciate your overview on the important topic of research advocacy and its impact on urology. To follow up on that, I'm going to discuss the nuts and bolts of how Congress, and more specifically appropriators, decide what to fund and what amount, and how advocacy has a major role in that process. Advocacy, like many things in life, is about relationships and making connections. It takes time to develop the right relationships with the right offices in order to become a force for your cause. In terms of research funding, there are two major appropriation bills that are perpetually of interest to the AUA, which are the NIH and the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs, which is administered under the Department of Defense. These two bills are developed through the Labor, Health, and Human Services, Education, and Related Agencies subcommittees, also known as LHHS, and the defense subcommittees in both the House and Senate. Therefore, the members and their staff who sit on these subcommittees are very important to know and meet. I say perpetually, as every year the appropriations process must restart and begin anew. If one is not vigilant in ensuring their interest is accounted for in either the bill itself or the report language, which signals legislative intent but does not have the force of law, there's a very real possibility that your interest topic can disappear. And take it from me, because I've had it happen. In my previous position at a patient advocacy foundation, I came on board to discover that my predecessors did not continue to meet with appropriations Hill staff on the CDMRP peer-reviewed cancer research program, in which the disease topic area had been listed. That year, our disease was not listed in the PRCRP as a topic area eligible for funding. And this was absolutely disastrous on multiple fronts, as you can imagine. First off, research that's already in progress, which could have applied for additional years of funding after showing some promise, would no longer have that option from the DoD. Second, new researchers seeking funds within that disease space have lost a funding avenue. At the time, the pot of total funding for that program, which covered several types of cancer, was about $80 million. So it's not a small loss. Finally, the relationships that had been built to get that disease listed as a topic area in the first place had completely disappeared. So that story actually has a happy ending, because myself and a now former colleague of mine, we didn't just give up on CDMRP. We reached out to other disease groups within the same topic area. We formed an alliance, and basically we worked our butts off in order to ensure that that disease group was back into the peer-reviewed cancer research program for the following fiscal year. And we were successful in that. But it did set our program goals back, as the ultimate goal, of course, for any program is go from that larger funding bucket where you have multiple disease types trying to take out of one pot of money to actually getting your single line item within the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. And so this is why appropriation strategies are kind of a game of inches, not miles. And progress in developing programs and making them sustainable take time and considerable effort. One of the success stories for the AUA is the prostate cancer research program, which actually has its own line funding item within the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. And so again, that takes a lot of time to develop and maintain that relationship every single year. Now, for NIH funding, Congress does not specifically set amounts for specific disease. Instead, the institutes and centers to actually award funding within their mission areas. However, Congress also uses language in reports and explanatory statements accompanying appropriation bills to designate funding for specified purposes. And this is that report language I was mentioning earlier. And again, it's how Congress lets the agencies know that its intent in providing this funding is going to a specific area. Because of the efforts of the AUA and others, funding for NIH and urology-related CDMRP topic areas has steadily increased year over year. And so now I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Carolyn Best for more information on how to work with federal agencies. Carolyn?
Sure, it's my pleasure. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you very much, Ray. So I'm delighted to take just a few minutes to talk to you about the advocacy work that we do directly with federal agencies. Aside from going to Congress and asking that money be appropriated for research, we need to have those direct interactions with the federal agencies themselves so they can understand what are the research needs for our urology patients and our practices. So I am going to start by talking about the NIH. Oftentimes it's understood as this, very large group, which indeed it is, of over 20 different institutes, but which ones are relevant for urology? So there are quite a number that fund urology research. The National Cancer Institute, of course, funds research on all of the urologic cancers. Most of the functional urology, or sometimes known as benign urology diseases, the research for those are funded through the National Institute of Diabetes and Disorders of the Kidney. NIDDK, and digestive disorders as well as there. NICHD, the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, is where research on urinary tract infections is supported, congenital anomalies and differences like that. The National Institute of Aging is another group that we speak to. Of course, they're focused on the urologic complications that occur as we age. So a lot of incontinence research is funded there, research on frailty and the impact on the urinary tract of that. Even the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, NIEHS, and the environmental factors that contribute to urologic diseases and conditions. The NIAID for infectious diseases, UTIs, STDs, and other infectious diseases that impact urology. Our research on those are supported through that institute. And then lastly, I'll mention the NINDS, the National Institute of Neurodegenerative Disease Research. So overactive bladder, neurogenic bladder, bladder consequences of spinal cord injury, they're funding research on those. So it's really imperative for us to make these institutes aware and educated on the needs for urologic research to be funded by their organizations. That's the only way that we can optimize that our opportunities for funding for urologic research. If these institutes understand what our field is and what our challenges are. But the NIH isn't the only institute that we need to have these conversations with. There's the VA, Veterans Administration, and their Office of Research and Development. CDMRP, as was mentioned by Ray, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. We not only ask Congress to appropriate funds for that organization, but we speak to that organization. We make sure that they know who the best peer reviewers are to use in their peer review processes, and that they understand what we see as the most critical issues in urology that are needing research. Other organizations, AHRQ, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, PCORI, Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. And we work directly with these organizations, these agencies, and make sure that topics in urology research receive as much emphasis as they need to be receiving. And so those are, Ray spoke about developing these relationships, and it takes time, and it does. And so we try to meet with these organizations as often as we'll be productive and have those conversations. So what do these interactions look like? It really is about education and awareness. Those are the two pillars of research advocacy, absolutely. Helping them understand who is the AUA, first of all, who is this group of urologists and urology researchers, and what are they working on? What problems are they trying to solve? What are the needs of our patients? You know, just a couple examples of what this can look like is one of our key meetings with the National Cancer Institute, NCI. We had a conversation about the BCG shortage, and they really were not aware of how extensive and impactful that shortage is, so that they could be mindful of how can we increase support for research on novel agents that could obviate this problem that we're having of a shortage of one agent that's impacting so many different patients. We also had another interaction with the National Cancer Institute where they issued a request for applications on bladder cancer research, but we really hadn't had an opportunity as a community of urologists, to weigh in on that. And so just identifying those opportunities to ensure that our community of surgeons and researchers is being heard in these opportunities is so critical. And then finally, I'll mention, we've been speaking with the National Institute on Aging for a number of years now, just helping them understand what are the urologic diseases and conditions that are most relevant for their research funding. And, you know, just even fundamentals as what is the difference between urology research and nephrology research, right? That's kind of a given for us, but it isn't for everyone. And so what we've seen after years of having these conversations is that funding for urologic research has in fact increased in the NIA as their understanding and their outreach to our community has increased as a result of our advocacy efforts. So it really can make a difference. It does take time. Another key factor, especially with an organization as large as the NIH, is that the individuals involved can vary. If you want to advocate for basic science, you'll talk to someone different than if you want to advocate for clinical trials or clinical research. And so learning who those people are and knowing the right things to say can be very important. So I'll just say that, you know, our job with the AUA and with these fine individuals from the Research Council and the Research Advocacy Committee, Drs. Kaplan and Chai being two of the great examples here, are really critical to helping us build those relationships and understanding what the most critical needs are in our field and making sure that the research is being able to be supported to move the field forward. So I think we'll move on to our patient advocacy next.
So thank you, Carolyn. Before I introduce Kimberly, I think what the people who are listening to this podcast and webinar are realizing is that advocacy takes a lot of different shapes and a lot of different verticals, and dealing with Congress, dealing with the NIH, and we are all involved in doing that, and the AUA is helping support that. But at the end of the day, we're in this business to take care of patients and getting them aligned with us and to have them to be our partners. It's a big part of what we do. So our next speaker, I think very, very important, is Kimberly Sirota, who is our patient and research advocacy coordinator, and she'll share with you some of the partnerships that we've developed. Kimberly?
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Kaplan. And thank you, Dr. Best and Ray, for those overviews. We are now going to kind of, as Dr. Kaplan said, continue the discussion about research advocacy with patient advocacy partners. As the leading advocate in the area of urology, the AUA not only works on behalf of our members, but also for their patients to ensure that their critical interests are promoted to a wide array of decision makers that Dr. Chai, Ray, and Dr. Best discussed. The patient voice is critical in research advocacy as they're able to discuss firsthand their experiences with surprise billing, treatment side effects, life beyond diagnosis, and so much more. So how does the AUA work to incorporate the patient voice? Well, we work really hard to cultivate strong and trusting relationships with more than 80 patient advocacy groups, which span, which is a very expansive representation of the urologic field, anywhere from kidney, bladder, and prostate cancer to functional urologic conditions like chronic UTIs, bladder exstrophy, erectile dysfunction, and multiple sclerosis. So through development of these relationships, we can really work to incorporate the patient voice into AUA research priorities in collaboration with individual patient advocacy groups to strengthen the ask. When meeting with policymakers on the Hill, as well as research institutes, we are stronger when the patient voice is incorporated into these meetings, either through our educational materials or having a patient share ways that research has been involved in their journey, both the good and the bad. I once had a patient that I advocated with who would bring in a medical bill for $700,000 to congressional meetings, and that got their attention. You know, they want to hear the patient perspective. In addition to the individual patient advocacy group collaboration, coalition participation is a very important aspect of research advocacy as it enlarges the base support, networks and connections, and gives strength in numbers. You can achieve more together than you can alone. Coalitions also bring together a really diverse range of people and organizations, and diversity can strengthen a campaign by broadening the perspective and understanding of the issue. One Voice Against Cancer, or OVAC, and the Defense Health Research Consortium, or the DHRC, are two of the larger coalitions that actively advocate for research advocacy. OVAC is a coalition of national nonprofit organizations primarily concentrated on advocating for funding at the National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, and the Division of Cancer Control and Prevention at the CDC. These are all tongue twisters. While DHRC has a congressionally directed medical research program, which Dr. Best and Ray previously spoke about. Some really exciting developments at the AUA. We have recently started 2 coalitions for prostate and kidney cancer that comprises of key stakeholders within the communities, including patients, caregivers, researchers, physicians, and allied health professionals. The coalition framework entails a collaborative approach designed to remove barriers to patient care and improve access to life-saving treatments. One other new thing, in 2019, the AUA started a pilot program called the Patient Advocacy Liaison, or PAL, to the Public Policy Council. The PAL serves a 1-year term on the PPC as a non-voting member to provide expertise and guidance on how patients are impacted by the AUA's advocacy initiatives. The position provides suggestions for making AUA initiatives patient-centered and interact with the patient advocacy partners to receive their feedback and relay information. The liaison works very closely with Ray and I's department, with the AUA's policy and advocacy department, to convey emerging advocacy issues on the patient advocacy space. So with all of that, you might be asking yourself, what can be achieved in working with patient advocacy partners? So much can be achieved through working with these amazing partners. Through collaboration with individual patient advocacy organizations and coalitions, much has been done to support and increase funding for research, and more work continues every single day to sustain the need for more urologic research. Since 2014, the CDMRP has actually doubled in funding size from $600 million to $1.2 billion. Funding for the NIH has steadily increased, and even more importantly, sometimes just the importance and awareness of urologic research has been spread across the Hill, NIH, and within other patient advocacy groups. Rising tides raise all ships. So thank you so much. I will hand it back over to Dr. Kaplan.
Who will now turn it over to Dr. Chai.
Oh.
So what's the AUA's role in protecting and securing federal funding for urologic research? I think you all probably have already heard a lot of the different roles that the AUA has in this particular function. But I think, in terms of what we do as researchers and clinicians, we educate, right? This is what we do with our patients. This is what we do when we give lectures, for example. We got to turn this educational ability into educating the people that we are advocating for urologic research, like our legislators. So we in urology, we deal with many high-impact public health issues. I wrote including but not limited to prostate cancer. And I think it's important to know that urology impacts across many different domains. I find this totally applicable when we go to the NIH and we go to the different institutes. And traditionally, I think for those who think of, say, prostate cancer being in the NCI, or kidney cancer or bladder cancer and all the functional urology at NIDDK, that's not always entirely true because, for example, prostate cancer treatment side effects could involve functional urology, which are very important to patients' lives. And that crosses over in areas that are missions of other institutes, such as the NIDDK or the NIA. So I think what we have to do is broaden our perspective so that we can educate the people we're advocating about how important urology is. The other aspect about urology research and advocating for this is that we really require a multidisciplinary approach. This is where it's not just the stakeholders that work together, like patient advocacy groups, patients, urologists, who go in and advocate for urology research, but also amongst the different scientific disciplines that have impact on urology. Now, it always sounds good about working in teams, but it can be difficult because it's easier to go it alone many times. And to figure out effective ways to advocate as a team takes time and effort. So I think education is very important so that we can impart our passion and our knowledge and also what is deficient in our areas to the people that we're trying to change or have them change policies of. So, you know, awareness is similar to education. Um, Again, I think the awareness aspect comes down to being able to have people understand how much urology conditions impact, so many people. And I think one area that I've been trying to advocate for, and I noticed some of my speakers not using the word benign urology, messaging is really important. Benign is not benign to people or patients, our patients who are afflicted with these conditions. And I've been trying to get the word functional urology in advocating, because functional urology, I think, has a much better ring. Benign means like it doesn't matter. People don't really care about it. So I think, having an awareness of what you're actually saying can make a difference in people listening. And one thing I will say that I didn't put in the slide is when you're advocating, a story always makes a better advocacy impact than statistics. So this is where going in with patients sometimes are probably, it's a better thing. You can have a patient tell their story, for example, to highlight the areas that support the data that you can share with. But I think a personal story always has a much stronger impact in advocacy. Next slide. I think that's my last slide.
So thank you, Toby. And I think you're getting a real flavor that advocacy has some legs to it. It's not just a word. You've heard our efforts on Capitol Hill. You've heard our efforts at NIH. You've heard our efforts with patients. And sometimes you wonder, well, what can I do? What can I personally do to really make a difference? And I think you've seen probably from the last election that when people get involved, things happen. And I think the same thing here from advocacy as well. And different people will get involved in different levels, and that's okay. But you got to start someplace. And I think the idea that you can make a difference is very important in terms of how you approach this. And it really starts from a bottom-up approach. And grassroots efforts really do make a difference. And a lot of us have had the opportunity to, at our own local levels, to speak to lawmakers. And they do listen, because at the end of the day, what a lawmaker wants more than anything else is to continue to be a lawmaker and to get reelected. And that means that they're interested in their population they're representing. And it's very, very important. For example, in my area here in New York, two of the congressional people who, one of them just retired and one of them just got reelected, had to do with congressional appropriations, and one of them had to do with the World Trade Center funding. So they are interested in what that means because those are their constituents. And I think each of us in our own area have different issues for sure. But when you speak to the congressional people, senators, talk about the issues that are affecting you, affecting your patients, affecting the things that they're going to be caring about, and then they'll get involved. Because sometimes these global ideas don't have relevance. They have to really be relevant to their constituency. Get involved with other people, develop coalitions. It really is a team effort. And when you bring people together, people begin to listen. You've heard about the tremendous efforts that Kimberly has done with patient advocacy groups. It does work. And those are the types of folks that people in Congress listen to, because those are the people who are going to keep them there in Congress. One of the things that we've also offered is show yourself, show what you're doing. Because as Carolyn said, a lot of congressional people don't know the difference between nephrology and urology. Well, let's teach them and let's show them. And we've offered that, and I think it has really had some positive impact when you're showing the day-to-day efforts. Because sometimes words that they'll read don't really mean anything to them. It's really what they see with their eyes, what they see with their groups that's going to be important. And it's the staff people. You're not going to get right away your senator. You're not going to just call up and say, "Hi, come to my lab or to my office." But get relationships with the staffers, because they are the ones who really are the networkers for them. And that's how things are going to work a lot better. So it's not as big and impossible as you think. You've seen various levels of how we can become engaged. But ultimately, all of us want to bring the best we can to our patients. And whatever voices we need to hear, need to listen to us, and whatever we need to do, really help us get to our efforts. So with that, I think Ray is the proprietor of questions. And if there are any questions, we will take them. So Ray, is there anything out there for us to address?
Yeah, so I have a question for Dr. Best. What do your NIH meetings look like, and who is actually there from the NIH?
That's a great question. So it varies a little bit based on which institute we're speaking with. So we don't meet with the NIH as a whole. We have individual meetings with the individual institutes that fund urologic research. So when the meetings are taken seriously by the institutes, absolutely. For example, when we meet with the NIA, the director of the National Institute on Aging is there, Richard Hodes. The deputy directors are there. The program officers that are responsible for the grants for urologic research are there as well. NCI is a larger organization, obviously. And so sometimes we'll have one or two deputy directors. We haven't yet met with the director of the NCI, but some of the program officers are there. Obviously, they can't all be there because there are so many different urologic cancer grants that are funded by the NCI, but they really are taken seriously. And we meet with not only the top level leaders of those organizations, but also the program officers themselves that manage the grants that go to our community.
Can I add to that, Carolyn?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I've been to these meetings that, Carolyn has planned, and they're very instructional for me, but to me, it seems like we tell them what's important to us, and they'll tell us what their research portfolio in urology is like. And some of these institutes, we just have started in the last year and a half developing relationships. Obviously, I think the goal is to grow the urology portfolio within those institutes that typically have had small urology portfolios. So this is the constant thing that we have to go back on a regular basis to remind them that these are important urologic problems and show us that your institute is continuing to advance in these particular problems. It takes time, but that's how I view these particular meetings.
I'll also just add
Great.
very briefly that communication is so key as well. One of the things that we've identified as an important area where we can all improve is communication from the AUA to the Institute, but also the other way around. So we have a really great relationship with NIDDK where they make sure that the AUA knows about different new types of funding opportunities that they have coming up so that we can make sure that we get the word out to our community so that we don't miss opportunities, which that's happened with different institutes. Our communities have missed opportunities because we weren't aware that they're happening. So sometimes just greasing those channels of communication can have a big impact.
So Ray, I'm kind of curious, as we've seen demonstrated, everybody gets along so lovingly on Capitol Hill and everybody just agrees all the time with each other. So what are your challenges? Because administrations change and people change. So when you approach this, what are the kind of the things that you think about and the challenges that you have to overcome?
Sure, and that's a great question. So, it varies depending on the office. You kind of hit a nail on the head earlier when we were talking about making relationships with staffers because they really are the gateway into Capitol Hill and to the legislators themselves, who are the ones who actually ultimately make the decisions. So it's getting to know the staffers themselves, understanding what makes the office want to actually move on a bill. So that takes a little bit of research on our part to know what their position might already be. In terms of things like CDMRP funding, knowing if there's a research facility within the state or within the district is also incredibly helpful. I can tell you I was just absolutely hounding an office because I very much wanted them to put us forward for a topic area in CDMRP, and I discovered that about $1.2 million had gone to their university in their state, which I'm not going to name, And when I brought the article to the staffer, the next day I got an email from him saying they were going to go ahead and put us in for that line item. So we were really happy about that. So, being prepared, knowing what questions to ask, knowing who your audience is, and also because this is politics, knowing where they kind of stand on the political divide. Are they very liberal? Are they very conservative? Are they somewhere in between? Those are all really important questions to ask. But again, Dr. Kaplan, I know you said this, and this has been echoed several times. Having that story too is so incredibly impactful. So coming in with a patient who has that $700,000 bill, coming with a patient who's got this great story about having to pick and choose. It's not a great story. It's a bad choice of words. Having a story about having to pick and choose between their mortgage, paying for college for their kids, or their food sometimes is incredibly impactful because everybody has family. I can't tell you how many staffers I've met who have people they know who have cancer of some sort. So kind of making that human connection and getting that empathy in there is incredibly important. So that would be the challenges I have, is kind of relating that across and relating it again to urology and kind of bringing it into the fold of our entire program.
So, when we developed this research advocacy committee, and Toby and I and Carolyn, we've been working for many years together. One of the things, and I think it should be for all the listeners here, sometimes people think this is a town and gown issue, that it's the people just in academic research who do this. And in fact, it's the opposite. It's really partnerships between everybody in urology. It's going to be a major thrust, really, in our research endeavors, is to get as many clinical practicing urologists involved. And frankly, you probably have even more connections and more power, and certainly more influence. And we really hope that you use that, because we're in this together. This is not a separation of town and gown. It's really doing the best we can for all our patients, and really such strong research is coming from our private practice partners. And we hope together we can really bring that to the forefront. I mean, Toby, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that is a very important point. I think we have more work to do on this collaboration between the community urologists as well as the ones that are typically thought of as research side, academic side. But one story that I want to tell you, that I think it was either you or maybe one of the Legislative Affairs Committee members that brought up, big community urology group treat a lot of urology patients, because if you're in a big group of 40, 50 urologists, you have a lot of patients who are votes for a certain district. When you have that kind of power to come into a legislative office, say, we have X number of your voters that we take care of, that we're interested in something, all of a sudden, those legislators suddenly like, what's your organization again? What do you want? They won't say that directly, but they definitely. So I think working with community urologists who actually have, that kind of that power, I guess, in terms of their patient. There's so many patients within their big group, which if we can work together on, again, common things. If research is important, this is what we're talking about. This is how our patients, their patients, all the urologist patients will get better treatments through research. And if we can find some common ground and utilize those particular levers to pull on, I think we will get more effective advocacy.
Well, another area that certainly has been in our news and over the last year, and is in particular focus on diversity and research in underrepresented groups. And I think it's, again, a major focus that we can all do better, and we're going to endeavor to do better. But I wonder if each of you can comment about what your efforts can be to reach out and bring discovery in either underrepresented populations or underrepresented researchers. So Ray, I'll start with you, and then perhaps Carolyn, Toby, and Kimberly.
Absolutely. So it's kind of funny because Dr. Chai and I were actually talking about this morning at 7:30, bright and early. So this is our third call on this essentially today. So we had talked about this at length, and this really is one of those areas of patient advocacy right now that's kind of taken over. It's become a focal point even before the protest in the spring, going into the summer. And so this is, racial disparities, health disparities have been something that we've really been looking at for a while across the board in patient advocacy. One of the things that I thought was very, very interesting, and I'm curious to see how to make this work within the AUA, but there's a professor that I met who works in the University of Maryland in the public health department who he's an African American, and he developed a program to go to barbershops across the country and to educate barbers on what to look for how to talk to their patients about screening, how to talk to their patients about when to go to the doctor, when to get into clinical trials, that sort of thing. And if we could figure out a way to engage with him or engage with programs like that, or we could get researchers to go and talk to the people where they live, go talk to these barbers or something along those lines to provide that information and give them those opportunities so that they could actually, in their areas of community, in those areas where these people are meeting and talking with one another, to have that come up in conversation and to provide a little bit of that trust that I think's been missing with the medical community and the African American community in particular. I think kind of knocking some of those barriers down would go a long way, and to not only helping with the health of that population, but also for the research and getting those different those underserved communities into clinical trials, into research programs, so that they can actually be representative in the final product that's being developed. If there's a product that's going through a clinical trial or something along those lines. So that was kind of one idea that Dr. Chai and I talked about. We're still going to be thinking about this for the next couple of weeks, and then we're going to meet again and hopefully come up with one or two things that the Research Advocacy Committee can actually really work on and move towards. And so I'm looking forward to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add that there's no scale too small or too large through which we should be addressing this issue. So where we're starting in the AUA research programs, tackling how can we improve the diversity of the urologic research workforce, which is critically important. So we're looking, first and foremost, we're looking at our own programs. Part of our new research strategic plan, one of the key goals is increasing diversity in first the AUA research programs and then in urologic research as a whole. And so we're looking across all of our research grants, research education, research advocacy programs, and figuring out how can we do better in terms of research, and those who are helping us set our vision and those who are engaging with us in these opportunities. And then we are taking this forward in our research advocacy efforts. Even today, we had a regular meeting with NIDDK where we talked about what are they doing in the diversity space for urologic research, and how can we complement and synergize with their efforts so that we can, for once and for all, get appropriate representation of everyone who's impacted by urologic disease and conditions, which is everyone, right? And have the right people at the table in terms of the leadership of urologic research and the effectors of urologic research.
So I'll chime in here, not so much on the researchers or the professionals who are underrepresented. I think that those are important areas that we have to improve on. I will comment on actually patients who are underserved or in minority population. So me moving to Boston Medical Center recently, Boston Medical Center is a safety net hospital that serves the underserved community of Boston. And I'm just learning how this place works, and it's fantastic, in my opinion, compared to other academic centers that I've been in that may not have had as much of a focus. But for those who know about federally funded neighborhood health centers, these are like satellite primary health sites for underserved communities around urban areas. And we are like a regional referral center for that. And I didn't know what this set of data meant, OCHIN, O-C-H-I-N. I go on Epic and I see like community health centers that have Epic, and OCHIN stands for Oregon Community Health Information Network. And it's fascinating because someplace in Oregon, I think it was in Portland, first thought of a neighborhood community health center for primary care. And they were very forward thinking, saying we have to have our data that we can go back and analyze, and we got to keep it in. And now in 2020, see, I didn't know this till last year, even though I've been in academic health centers my whole career, basically. But OCHIN is nationwide. There's, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of neighborhood health center data that's collected. And the majority of these patients are minority underserved patients. And I was thinking what a rich research tool that's going to be specific for urology, because I'm a urologist, but for others, and how that data can be analyzed for access to care, what kind of care these patients coming in through the community health centers are getting. And for someone who doesn't do primarily prostate cancer, I'm also impressed how I didn't forget my urology basics, because I'm diagnosing prostate cancer in men with LUTs that are coming from like Caribbean island communities of people of color. And, I would just think BPH, because I'm, Steve, I'm a functional guy. But I always say, you got to rule out prostate cancer in these men. And I'm shocked. I'm finding very advanced prostate cancer, which I think in other, practice settings, those were probably already diluted out for me to see. But I see that for myself. So maybe I'm a little bit selfish in sharing this, in the sense that I think there's a great opportunity to do community engagement, community science, research in underserved communities, and we have to educate. Obviously, we're not looking at them as somebody we can do research on. That's not the way. Prostate cancer we know affects more adversely, people of color, and so I think building a relationship and building a team partnership and studying a population such as this, which has been difficult to study, is a way to sort of progress in this area. So I'm sort of speaking on the patient side, if you will, and I'm very fortunate to be in that kind of environment where I think there's potential to develop these kind of partnerships.
Kimberly, just in terms of anything with the patient advocacy groups?
Sure. Yeah. A lot of our patient advocacy groups are definitely looking at this, and some, this is their main topic of conversation, is the health disparities. For example, FEN is their prostate cancer group, and they work on this pretty regularly with webcasts and podcasts. There's a lot of other groups out there that are doing that as well. In our prostate cancer coalition that I mentioned earlier, health equity is top of mind. It has come up in every meeting. So I think it's something that, we're looking at kind of taking on from a coalition perspective, just to make sure that we really are getting a lot of diverse urologic conditions, actually, in general, to come together to talk about diversity in just the urologic patient in general. So there is definitely a lot going on with it, and it's something that we're really excited to be, working on in the next couple of years, and really develop out, come up with some really good strategies, and work on it.
Well, I think also, and I'll speak for Dr. Chai, is as he's getting older, some of these urologic issues affects you, and when people are affected themselves, particularly as they're urologists, I think it has a lot more meaning. So, we didn't talk, just in the interest of time, there's also advocacy internationally. That will be another outreach that we're going to be doing, because, we focused on how we can do it here in the United States, but we have partners around the world that we're going to try to use as well. And I think that's going to be another important part of our endeavors. And we also have to remember, while talk a lot urology, we have prostates, but it's really I don't want to use the word cradle to grave, but it's really conditions that actually affect children, the pediatric populations, and there are certain very strong groups that are affected, and very passionate people about that, because when children are affected, it really brings an extra level of emotional support, and that's something that's important also to people in Congress and NIH, and as we're aging, and the population is aging, things like benign urologic conditions and malignancies that Toby alluded to, I think are going to be very, very important. Are there any last comments that folks want to make before we close up? I'll leave it, we'll start with Ray. Any last comments or additions or things that we may have not talked about?
Dr. Kaplan, I think the only addition I'll make is, if you want to get involved, I think Kimberly is probably going to talk about this as well. As a urologist, coming and speaking with the AUA and kind of giving us your information and allowing us to connect you with some patient groups would definitely be a wonderful avenue for you. We would love to work with you. It's definitely something that we do every day. And so we're here and we are available, and we're always willing to talk and kind of go through some ideas. And hopefully, if you have an interest, that would be an avenue that you consider. So please do that.
Yeah, I'll just
Carolyn
add,
from the Office of.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just add that Absolutely, that's the right thing to do as a urologist, but researchers, you are not off the hook either. You know, there's a researcher I know in the Midwest, every time she gets a grant, she goes to her representatives and says, thank you. Thank you. So they're aware that this money is coming to their state, their district, and the importance of supporting research across the board. And then getting engaged in AUA research advocacy, or any opportunities for that matter for research advocacy. There is no voice that is not important to the cause. And so if you have that interest and you just need help on how to get started, let us know and we would be happy to connect with you.
Toby, any last comments?
I do. I want to mention the AUA Summit, Advocacy Summit. That is an important meeting that anybody interested in all the different podcasts that have already been, that came before us, you should attend the AUA Summit. It's a great meeting that covers every aspect of advocacy, everything we talked about here and more. And it's usually pre-COVID held at, in Washington, D.C., right next to Capitol Hill. And I know we'll be going back to D.C. and meeting in person, hopefully very soon. But I want to plug the AUA Advocacy Summit.
Okay. And Kimberly, any last comments?
Yeah, just to kind of go off what Ray said about, reaching out to us if, if anyone wants to get involved with any of the patient side of it. Our patient advocacy groups are always excited to be able to make new connections with urologists. So I would absolutely implore you to reach out to us. They're also very active on Twitter. And so just following them on Twitter and seeing if they're doing Hill Days. Right now, it's a lot of virtual Hill Days that these patient groups are doing. So it could be a lot easier for you to be able to interact and participate in those kind of meetings. So again, feel free to reach out to us, get on Twitter and, look up these groups and follow them and stay involved.
So in closing, I wanted to thank all my fellow panelists, and I think you've probably learned a lot tonight. You learned that advocacy is not just a word. It's really behavior and meaning and passion that people bring here. But for us as a group, you have to be in it to win it. And sitting on the sidelines is not going to help anybody. And be engaged. When you are engaged, you can make a difference. And the AUA will help with that. They're very committed to this. Research is one of the tripartite missions of the AUA, and we're going to really build it even more over the next number of years. So again, thank you, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.